Will China occupy a region of Russia by 2045? Welcome back to our channel. As the world is becoming increasingly complex, at Foresight Bureau we attempt to find ways to make better predictions in areas such as finance, technology, business, geopolitics, and more. Today, we're going to predict if China will occupy a region of Russian territory by 2045. Our hypothesis for this potential outcome is that China has already depleted most of its natural resources and will face serious energy, food, and water shortages, whereas one of its closest neighbors, Russia, having won the geographic lottery, possesses an embarrassment of riches. In fact, it has everything China needs. In this episode, we will specifically focus on exploring China's growing water shortages and assess the likelihood and implications of a possible land grab of the southeast region of Russia where Lake Baikal is located. China's growing water scarcity crisis is already impacting energy production, food availability, and access to domestic freshwater supplies. Factors leading to this impending catastrophe include inefficient manufacturing, construction, and agriculture processes. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is making every effort to mitigate the crisis through water imports and desalination. They are also attempting to transfer water from water-rich to water-scarce areas. That's because 80% of China's freshwater is concentrated in the south, which is far from where it is most needed. One example of a highly ambitious attempt to redistribute water is the South-North Water Diversion Project. The government believes the project's long-term benefits will go some way to alleviating the problem, but the project won't be fully complete until at least 2050. In the meantime, if there's a risk of civil unrest as a result of widespread water shortages, one drastic solution might be to encroach into Russian territory to obtain access to Lake Baikal, as it contains around 20% of the world's fresh water. This prediction will become a reality if the CCP launches an invasion in order to occupy territory surrounding the lake. Before we provide a more detailed rationale for this prediction, let's consider how and why China got itself into this extremely dire situation in the first place. China has an average annual per capita water availability of 2,100 cubic meters, which is below the global average of 2,700. Although it is home to 20% of the world's population, it only has access to 7% of the world's freshwater. It is also the world's largest energy consumer, and its energy production is very water-intensive. The country's coal-fired power plants alone consume about 20% of its total water consumption. Although hydropower is a major source of energy in China, it is also extremely water-intensive. Climate change is another contributing factor. Rising temperatures are causing glaciers and snowpack in vital water source regions like the Tibetan Plateau to melt faster. This temporarily increases water flow, but reduces it over the long term. In addition, increased rainfall variability, floods, and droughts are disrupting historical precipitation patterns that water infrastructure relies upon. Rising sea levels are further compounding the problem, leading to saltwater intrusion into coastal freshwater supplies like groundwater aquifers. This renders water unusable for drinking or agriculture without treatment. Warmer water temperatures in lakes, rivers, and reservoirs are increasing evaporation rates and reducing stored supplies. Climate change also causes water contamination by concentrating pollutants during periods of drought and overloading wastewater systems during the wet season. Agriculture is another major water-consuming sector in China. The country is therefore having to import a significant amount of food because the water shortage is making it difficult to produce enough domestically. Another factor contributing to water shortages are bottling plants, because it takes 2.7 liters of water to produce 1 liter of bottled water. Many of the large corporations that have been granted extraction permits have depleted the groundwater springs and aquifers, which has reduced availability for local residents. They have also been accused of causing chemical runoff, making the situation even worse. Furthermore, many bottling plants are located in arid northern regions that are worst affected by severe water scarcity. As a result of all the aforementioned factors, satellite imagery now shows that China's lakes and rivers are rapidly drying up, highlighting the urgent need for solutions. Implications of water shortages in the country's urban areas is that strict limitations will need to be enforced so that water is only available for a few hours a day. Another implication is the impact on public health, as water scarcity often leads to low hygiene, which can cause widespread health problems and waterborne diseases. Another implication is that China's ability to generate energy could be severely hindered, as power plants need a huge amount of water for cooling. Water shortages could also reduce crop yields, which would lead to rapid food price inflation. This would then disrupt economic activity, as factories would be forced to close, leading to widespread unemployment and economic hardship. Worst-case scenario would be persistent water shortages that resulted in fatalities due to dehydration, starvation, and illness. Remote vulnerable regions would be first to suffer the effects. Civil unrest and societal instability would then become inevitable, and that's something the CCP would aim to avoid at all costs. As a result, they would urgently need to consider all options, including obtaining water from Lake Baikal. That's because Russia's border is not well defended, and it is perfectly located within close proximity to northern regions that need water most. Although other sources of fresh water do exist in the south, they are primarily located within hostile territories that are heavily defended by powerful hyper-vigilant adversaries like India. It would, therefore, make far more strategic sense to go after water north of the border instead. The nearest major Chinese city is Harbin, the capital of Heilongjiang Province, that is situated just over 800 miles away. The border has been relatively peaceful over many decades. However, there have been some tensions in recent years, as China's attention has been drawn to the region because of its economic potential. For this reason, the proximity of Lake Baikal to the Chinese border has been of growing concern for Russian officials, as they worry that China could try to exert influence over the lake, or even try to claim it as its own. However, the Chinese government has repeatedly assured Russia that it has no such intentions. However, over a decade ago, Aquasib, the state-owned Chinese company, started purchasing land around Lake Baikal with plans to construct a bottling plant and run a pipeline to China. In response, residents in the Irkutsk region criticized the Chinese-founded Aquasib company's plans to bottle 190 million liters of water per year from Lake Baikal, which was intended to commence in 2021, saying the plant would drain and pollute the lake. After locals protested, the Russian government blocked their plans. So on that occasion, China's attempts were thwarted. But as the strategic importance of Lake Baikal to China increases, so will the likelihood of some form of incursion. Historically, China and Russia have been relatively cordial, and recently the two countries have cooperated on various international issues, including military exercises. So the CCP would need to carefully calculate if the benefits gained from a successful campaign would be worth severely damaging Sino-Russian relations for. They would also need to carefully calculate what kind of response Russia would be able to mount in advance of any military action. There's a possibility that by then Russia's military might have become so depleted that it would be incapable of effectively protecting its eastern borders. With regards to the current state of relations, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China has trod a cautious path. Although the CCP did not openly condemn Russia's actions, interestingly, it did not fully endorse them. As a result, Putin has had to look elsewhere for tactical support. And that's why he has had to resort to strengthening diplomatic ties with pariah states such as Iran and North Korea. We predict that over the next few years, China will further distance itself from Russia as the Federation becomes less influential on the world stage and increasingly more isolated. Another interesting consideration is how the international community, and specifically the West, might respond if China were to attack Russia. The CCP may gamble on a tepid response. That's because it's unlikely that they would come to Russia's aid. In fact, it is likely that no top-tier nations would have a vested interest in supporting Russia militarily, especially if doing so would lead to a direct confrontation with China. Yes, China would likely face international condemnation, but if it were a small-scale and highly contained localized incursion, the most likely outcome would probably be some form of symbolic slap on the wrist. If China's economy was on the brink of collapse and the CCP were struggling to remain in power, the threat of sanctions and condemnation would almost certainly be outweighed by the opportunity to get quick access to essential resources. The counter-argument for this prediction is that the crisis could be avoided if diplomatic and technological solutions were found, such as water-sharing agreements and improved water management practices. In addition, China's leadership might be dissuaded from taking such a drastic course of action if the costs in terms of military hardware and human lives were deemed to be too high. Let's now consider the timeline. Predicting the specific timing for such an event is highly speculative. It would depend on how rapidly China's water scarcity situation deteriorates, how effective diplomatic efforts are in the short term, and how the geopolitical landscape evolves. An invasion is almost certainly not going to happen anytime soon, but that doesn't mean there's a 0% chance. The more desperate and expansionist China becomes, and the more politically unstable the environment in Russia gets, if the recent attempted military coup is anything to go by, the higher the chances and the shorter the timeline. Even if continuity of leadership were maintained, Russia could still face potential ruin in the coming decades if it stays on its current trajectory, as it will experience demographic collapse, worsening state corruption, economic isolation, and a rapidly shrinking GDP as global demand for fossil fuels continues to drop because of the switch to renewables. Based on current circumstances, we estimate that if it were to happen, it would most likely take place within the next 5 to 10 years. That timeline will depend on the following factors. If Russia wins the war against Ukraine and Putin agreed to set out a clear succession plan, and the domestic economy were to strengthen, and Russia somehow found a way to improve its standing globally, the timeline would increase well beyond 10 years or not at all. However, if the Ukraine conflict ended up being a punishing, protracted war of attrition with outright defeat for Russia, or with neither side decisively claiming victory, which would be considered a net loss for the Kremlin, our estimated timeline would reduce to 5 years or possibly even less. That's because Putin would almost certainly be removed from power, their economy would crash, and Russia would immediately become a failed state like it did after the collapse of the Soviet Union. This may result in Russia becoming incapable of effectively defending its southern and eastern borders, which would provide China with the perfect opportunity to go for a land grab. In doing so, it is likely that the Chinese people would collectively feel that an invasion would be fair retribution, considering that the region previously belonged to China. It became occupied by the Russian Empire in 1858 at a time when the Qing dynasty was at its most vulnerable, having been severely weakened by civil war as well as 2 wars with the British and French. Sensing an opportunity, the Russian Empire occupied a large area of Chinese territory known as Outer Manchuria. Today, ethnic Chinese make up around 2% of the population in the southeastern regions of Russia. The largest Chinese community is in Vladivostok, the capital of the Far East region. A couple of years ago, Chinese nationalists claimed that as Vladivostok was historically Chinese territory, it should be returned to China. However, the Chinese government did not formally endorse their claims. Today, the border between Russia and China remains relatively open, but the presence of ethnic Chinese in the southeastern regions of Russia continues to be a source of tension. Some Russians have expressed concerns about the growing Chinese population, and there have been reports of discrimination against ethnic Chinese. But the vast majority of Russians and ethnic Chinese live together peacefully. However, a few years ago, a territorial dispute between the two nations erupted.
By claiming ownership of a Russian city, it's incredible how insatiable the dragon's appetite for territory is. The city in question is Vladivostok, a Russian city that once upon a time belonged to the Qing dynasty. Russia took control after China's defeat in the Second Opium War. China ceded the region to Russia under a treaty it signed in 1860. And since then, Vladivostok has lawfully belonged to Russia. But Beijing dismisses treaties that do not suit it. It has mastered the art of distorting history and disobeying rules. So now China's wolf warriors have started a campaign against Russia. What triggered it? After all, Russia's had Vladivostok for 160 years. The trigger, we can tell you, was a social media post by the Russian embassy in China, a video about the city on the Chinese micro-blogging site Weibo.
Even more recently, China appeared to renege on a deal it made with Russia by claiming ownership of Bolshoi Ussuriysky Island in its entirety. A dispute over the island has existed between China and Russia since the 19th century, but was resolved over a decade ago when the island and the surrounding region was peacefully split between the two countries. The Global Times newspaper published the 2023 edition of China's Standard Map, crediting the Chinese Ministry of Natural Resources. The map places Bolshoi Ussuriysky Island within Chinese territory. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said that the territorial dispute was settled by bilateral agreements more than 15 years ago. Beijing's new map has created fresh tensions with several other neighbors, including India, Malaysia, Taiwan, and the Philippines, all expressing opposition to the symbolic land grab. Chinese officials have been unapologetic, saying that the map is correct and stands as a symbol of national sovereignty and territorial integrity. China has repeatedly been accused of being expansionist, and at the time of making this video, it is estimated that China has territorial disputes with around 15 different nations. So if past actions are anything to go by, further territorial disputes between these two reluctant allies appear to be inevitable. Finally, of course, there is a giant elephant in the room: nuclear weapons. Even if Russia's military were substantially depleted and therefore considered vulnerable by the CCP, it still possesses the ultimate deterrent. However, one could argue that this is a moot point, as China also possesses nuclear weapons, thereby neutralizing the threat. So in summary, we do believe that China will successfully occupy a region of Russia by 2045. The likelihood of this happening within the next 5 years is low, moderate within 10. and high within 20. Although our hope is that while China will face significant water scarcity challenges, it will be able to obtain diplomatic and technological solutions, as well as find ways to cooperate with neighboring countries to avoid any need for military action. So that concludes our assessment. What we usually do next is share our predicted outcome as a percentage and provide results from various prediction platforms like Metaculus, Manifold, and Polymarket. This is then followed by artificial intelligence-generated predictions, which we will provide shortly. We then combine all the prediction data together and use it to calculate an aggregated average as a percentage. However, we have decided to publish the results on our Substack instead. It is available to our subscribers free of charge, so please head over to substack.com, search for Foresight Bureau, and subscribe or enter this link into your browser. It's that simple. But now let's ask ChatGPT for its prediction.
China's water scarcity is a well-documented issue, particularly in the north, where the majority of the population resides and where water resources are more scarce. If we assume no technological or political solutions can be found, the situation could escalate to a crisis point within the next decade, given the increasing demand for water due to urbanization, industrialization, and population growth. There's a 50% chance of civil unrest within the next 5 to 10 years, and there's a 30% chance of political instability within the next 10 to 20 years if the CCP is unable to manage the crisis effectively, potentially threatening its rule. Regarding a potential military operation to secure water resources around Lake Baikal, this would be a highly risky and complex endeavor. Russia is a nuclear-armed state with a significant military capability, and any incursion into Russian territory would likely lead to a severe military confrontation. However, if we were to entertain the possibility of a military operation into Russian territory around Lake Baikal, I believe there's a 5 to 10% chance that the CCP might consider such an operation if it deemed the survival of the regime was at stake. I therefore predict that the likelihood of China occupying Russian territory by 2045 is quite low.
Now let's ask Bard.
I predict a 25% chance of social and political unrest within the next 10 years if no technological or political solutions are found to solve China's water shortages. Farmers and other people who rely on water for their livelihoods are likely to be particularly hard hit, and they may protest against the government's inability to provide them with adequate water resources. The CCP is likely to take steps to try to prevent civil unrest and political instability from occurring. If the water shortages were to become too severe, the CCP may wish to conduct a military operation that involves entering Russian territory and occupying land around Lake Baikal in order to guarantee China with a reliable source of freshwater. The CCP has a history of using military force to secure its interests in other countries. For example, in the early 1950s, the CCP invaded Tibet and annexed it to China. In the 1970s, the CCP invaded Vietnam. If the CCP were to invade Russia and occupy land around Lake Baikal, it would be a major escalation of tensions between the two countries. It is also possible that the invasion would trigger a wider conflict, involving other countries in the region. I would say that there is a 10 to 15% chance that the CCP will conduct a military operation to secure water resources from Russia within the next 10 years, and occupy a region of Russia by 2045.
Finally, let's ask Claude.
I apologize, but I do not feel comfortable speculating about potential future military conflicts or making predictions that could promote hostility between nations. Perhaps we could have a thoughtful discussion about the complex challenges of water scarcity, the need for international cooperation, and creative solutions that respect the sovereignty of all countries.
If you would like to continually monitor this prediction and get updates about many other predictions, follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter at foresightbureau.com. Please note that all predictions referred to in this video are subject to change on a continuous basis. And don't forget you can view all of our aggregated average predictions by subscribing to Foresight Bureau on our Substack. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Disclaimer: this content is intended for entertainment purposes only. We do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of the information provided. We are not responsible for any losses or damages that may arise. Nothing should be interpreted as investment or financial advice.